Tableau 1, Prelude to a Theory of Chance, Part 2, The Amazing Aspects of Fluctuations and the Hot Hand Phenomenon. In Tableau 1, Part 1, we looked at evidence of chance around us. Chance is ubiquitous, and naturally, we have a strong and intuitive feel for it. But in the midst of the familiar lurks strangeness. And as part of the introductory lectures, I'll want to conclude by showing you unexpected dells, unexpected ripples in the fabric of chance, in experiments with which we are quite familiar. So, to begin, what is the simplest experiment one can think of involving chance? Unquestionably, the toss of a coin. So, let's consider the repeated tosses of a coin, and of course this gives us a template for what we view as a random sequence. Now, we are at the start of a semester of study, and perhaps a little tedium could be forgiven. So, I'm going to ask you to do two exercises at the cost of a modicum of tedium. Naturally enough, I hope that you'll be willing to indulge me, because there is, of course, a method in the madness. So, to begin, our simplest understanding of what constitutes a random sequence assuredly comes from the repeated toss of a coin. Do the following. Take a coin, toss it repeatedly 50 times, and write down the sequence of successes and failures, heads and tails, that you observe. To keep life simple for yourself, write 1 for a head and 0 for a tail, and so what you will write is a long string of 50 ones and zeros. Do this now. Pause the lecture, and when you've completed writing your sequence, restart. Oh, good, you're back. Now, here is the second part of what I'd like you to do. As your exemplar of a random sequence, write down the first 50 ones and zeros that comes into your head. Don't overthink it. Just write down what comes naturally to you as an example of a random sequence. Something like 1100, 1110, 000, 110101, and so forth. Just a string of ones and zeros randomly generated from you. Pause the lecture while you do this, and restart when you're ready to continue. Good. Now you have two sequences. Examine them. Do they look similar? Do they share characteristics? Or do they look rather different, macroscopically, from each other? Pause again and take a look at them. See if you can discern any patterns or lack thereof in your sequences. And restart the lecture when you're ready yet again. So, now you're back. Here is an example of sequences that I generated in accordance with the rules I gave you. Here are two sequences labeled star and double star. I generated one of them by tossing this coin 100 times. And I generated the other by just writing down a random jumble of ones and zeros that came into my head. Can you tell which was which? Now, these sequences are similar to the sequences you've written down. One of them generated by a toss of a coin, one of them generated from my mind. Are they different? Do they share similar features? Now, assuredly, both of them are purportedly representing random sequences. The exemplar of a random sequence is the one generated by the toss of a coin. Is the one generated artificially similar in characteristic? which is which? Can I discern one from the other? Well, naturally, if a sequence is random, we feel instinctively that maybe one should check to see that the successes and failures are in balance. Are the ones and zeros in balance? Now, if you look at the sequence labeled star, you'll find that there are 49 ones and 51 zeros. The sequence labeled double star, on the other hand, has 46 ones and 54 zeros. The ones and zeros, heads and tails, look like they're in balance. It doesn't look like there's very much to cavil at on that score. Now, in a situation like this, it is always profitable to see if one can draw a picture. So here is a graphical view of these two sequences. What I've done is plotted the sequence as if they were drawn temporally from left to right in time. So 1 for whenever you see a 1, and it drops to a 0 whenever you see a 0. And you observe in both sequences a rather random, jagged movement between ones and zeros. Very good. Now, looking at the figure, does anything stand out? Now, when you look at these two figures, you might say, well, the graph of the sequence labeled star is jagged, but it appears to have rather large mesas and valleys, peaks and dips. Now, to focus on them, here are 3, a mesa and 2 valleys, which seem to be quite large. The sequence labeled double star, on the other hand, is jogging back and forth fairly unpredictably, like the first sequence, but doesn't seem to have a large mesa or a large valley anywhere. If we hone in on these mesas and valleys, you find that in the sequence labeled star, you have at one place in the sequence 7 contiguous ones, 7 heads, and at 2 other places in the sequence, a sequence of 5 consecutive tails and a sequence of 6 consecutive tails. The sequence labeled double star, on the other hand, has no contiguous sequence of successes and failures, heads and tails, of length more than 4. I wonder if the evidence for the sequence labeled star is looking just a little suspicious. Do we anticipate that in a string of coin tosses that we'll get repeated self-same outcomes? Consider, for example, 7 tosses of this coin. What are the chances of obtaining 7 heads in a row in 7 tosses? Now, if one tosses this coin 7 times, each toss has got 2 possibilities, a head or a tail, and so the sequence of 7 tosses has got 2 times 2 times 2, 7 times in all, or 2 to the power 7, or 128 possible different sequences of heads and tails. Of those 128 distinct possible sequences of heads and tails, the sequence with all heads is precisely one of them, and so the odds, in a very natural sense, of observing 7 heads in 7 tosses of a coin is 1 in 128, less than 1%, or more precisely, no more than 8 chances in 1,000. This looks distinctly suspicious. So should we anticipate that in a random sequence of 100 ones and zeros, that somewhere there's a sequence of 7 ones, or 5 zeros, or 6 zeros in a row? This is looking distinctly suspicious. To proceed further, perhaps then we should look at patterns where there are successive runs of successes and failures. We turn to this next.